Technology has always fascinated me. It evolves much faster than any living species on Earth. It has made life so much more convenient that I cannot even fathom how many professions it rendered obsolete. Yet, I had always had the sneaking suspicion that it would eventually lead to mankind's undoing. I had always imagined robots imbued with artificial intelligence that would figure out just how harmful the human race is to itself and everything around it. But it wasn't a robot army considering apocalyptic genocide worthy of a science fiction blockbuster. Technology played its role in the fall of humanity, but we had much more of a role to do with it. It was decades before we knew what was happening in the very world that we live in. Everything must have started the day of the attack. A group of religious nutjobs had hatched a plan to destroy several buildings, including a government facility and a financial powerhouse. After the bombings, we were all thought we were united in our goal of seeing these murderers and their entire organization brought to justice. It turns out it had some more intricate plans. Over the next few years, little things started happening in various parts of the country, barely significant to take notice of. A strange court ruling here, or not a mandate from a local government official there, like tiny blips on an otherwise quiet radar. Something definitely did not feel right. I was just a kid when the attack happened, but by this time I was a young man with some strong beliefs and an interest in politics. I didn't realize that there was any connection, but I had begun to feel that politicians and their decisions were beginning to veer into very unsettling direction. Little by little, social progress was being slowed and hindered in certain areas. It wasn't exactly alarming that some judges were voting against marriage equality or even some issues of gender equality. Governors of states that generally opposed progressive legislation were not looked at twice for mandating silly things like heterosexual Pride Day. But to a strong believer in equality like myself, every instance I was made aware of concerned me. The more it happened, the more worried I became. It was 13 years after the attack that the public had started learning the truth. But by then, it was too little too late. At first, we found out that our government was spying on us, monitoring phone calls, texts, and internet activity. We assumed it was the sole purpose of finding dangerous people and preventing the next attack, but we never could have imagined how much of our lives were under surveillance, and that none of us knew the real reason why. There were cameras on every street corner, in every store, in our computers, in our phones, even hidden in our televisions. At any given time, the average person would have 3 to 5 cameras pointed at them from every angle, monitoring their every move. About 20 years after the attack, we began to learn the truth behind it all. It took a long time, but some began to piece together that people were going missing at an alarming rate. The pattern would begin that no one will miss, but eventually it escalated to the point where conspiracy theories began to surface. They suggested that the missing people had all been critical of the government's violent responses to perceived threats to national security and detainment of suspects without trials or charges. A few years later, the world as we knew it began to mutate beyond recognition. No one knew to think. No one knew what to think. When the foundation for a better world went public. They talk about restoring the lost morality of society at large and how they wanted everyone to help them build a utopia out of the shattered pieces of our once great nation. Some people thought it was insane or just a bunch of corporate lies told by greedy executives in fancy suits. Those voices quickly fell silent and were never heard from again. It wasn't long before the FBW began instilling their virtues, though what many people would call propaganda. They told us that children should obey their parents, and if that didn't, they would be shipped off to a boarding school owned and operated by the Foundation. They also had some very archaic views about women and believed that feminism was one of the reasons the world had descended into chaos. So women were banned from the workforce by law. The FBW was flexing its muscles by showing us that it had hooks and judges and government officials from all branches. Before long, they were labeling certain groups as unclean for having beliefs that opposed those of the Foundation. Any and all members of these groups were thrown in prison or simply vanished off the face of the earth. They began to censor media and entertainment that they called inappropriate. Swear words, become more progressively more permitted in television in past years, were now abolished by the Foundation. They were also banned any content of a sexually subversive nature, including homosexuality and all forms of pornography. Thousands of shows, movies, and music were outlawed for their mature content. The rating systems were replaced by a stamp of Foundation approved status. Anything without the label was contraband. Video games are targeted as well. Despite the majority of the population being at least casual gamers, the FBW managed to ban violence in video games. This even included the most child-friendly games that included any fighting. They claimed that it was to prevent further tragedies by eliminating violent behavior from the mainstream. The aforementioned bans of sex and swearing were also applied to games, as well as the Foundation's stamp of approval system. Even education started to change. The FBW replaced science and history textbooks with their own literature. Over time, they rewrote history as they saw fit, and the laws of science were whatever the Foundation decreed. The medical profession was all but abolished, under the idea that true believers of their doctrine would be free of all illness. Those that died of fatal diseases were seen as unclean doubters that got what they deserved. By now, the Foundation's control is absolute. Everyone knows how they operate, but no one talks about it because they fear for their lives. The people who vanished were killed and their bodies destroyed. They punish children for the transgressions of their parents and eliminate every record of their victims' existence. Their eyes are everywhere, and any resistant movements are squashed before they even begin. I sit here, typing this out on an old computer, one without any of their cameras in it. I don't know if this will reach anyone or if it even matter. In fact, by the time I finish sending it out, they probably have found me and I'll be dead. If nothing comes of this, I want someone out there to know that there was once a time when people were free. We didn't live under the threat of death from a falsely altruistic corporation. I'm just old enough to barely remember when people weren't forced to live by the teachings of the Bible.